You all excited about talking about Power Pack? So we got a great group right here. We have Karl Potts, who I just found out. I was looking at his history and thinking, wow, there's a lot of great stuff we can talk about, and did not find Power Pack. But then you said you were the editor.
Yeah.
So we're
That's
fine.
one of my proudest moments as
Yeah.
an editor. Yeah.
And June, I was going to ask you before, is it Bridgman or Brigman?
Brigman.
Brigman. So June Brigman, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, thank you.
So one of the things, like I started doing comic book podcasting almost 20 years ago. And when you meet people that you see the names in comics, and since it's not a huge, you don't get like news media, so you never hear people pronouncing names.
Right.
So like when I first met Joe Kubert, it took a little while, and I even get people saying it's Kubert. So you sometimes the pronunciations, Robert Kanier,
Kanigher.
Can't see, that was another one. It's when I met
Bill Sienkiewicz.
that was another one.
That's a good
But
one.
I'm a huge
How do you say
Usagi
Mr. McCapicalix or whatever the heck that is?
I don't.
Okay.
Yeah, and when I met, I'm a huge Usagi Yojimbo fan, so I struggled with, how do I say it? Is it Usagi? So I had to ask Stan Sakai exactly. Then I went out and got the tattoo.
Oh, nice.
Love Usagi. So we're here to talk about Power Pack, and I remember when Power Pack came out, and I was a teenager, so it was a little bit sort of below my, I guess I wasn't the target audience. But my first question is, was there a target audience? Did this book get created specifically for young kids, or was it a hope that because it was kind of tied in with the X universe, like were the X-Men fan going to read this and then maybe pass it off to somebody younger? What was the sort of origins?
You want to speak about that first?
I don't remember even talking about target audience.
Exactly.
We just wanted to do a really good superhero book for Marvel.
Just happened to be kids.
It just happened to be kids. We were approaching it as an all ages book. Yeah, that's my memory of it.
Exactly.
So there was never any thing from Marvel saying, let's target these? Because reading it, and the art was brighter, the coloring was more exciting, the uniforms had rainbows on them, and it was like, this was completely opposite of everything I was reading, especially at the time when comics were starting to get a little darker, a little more serious, and this came out, and to me it was like a breath of fresh air. Like I could read this and it was palate cleansing instead of the emotional toll that every book seemed to be having at that particular time. So you're saying it was just, here's a comic.
Yeah, well, it was Louise Simonson's first series she created, and I remember she gave me the proposal and asked me if I'd be interested in editing it, and I read it, and I just thought it was delightful stuff. And I don't know why she picked me. I mean, I was the editor of The Punisher and Defenders and Doctor Strange, but I'd known her personally for a while, and I guess she trusted me not to ruin her creation, and she knew I also had very diverse, eclectic tastes in the things I like, and so I just read it and I just thought it was brilliant. She goes, oh, by the way, I found this great artist to work with who does great kids. I don't know if many of you realize it, but the vast majority of comic artists, no matter how great they are, draw mutants for children. And there's very relatively small number of people who draw great kids, and June fit the bill perfectly. And it's just, we just took off from there. We didn't, like I said, we didn't pay a lot of attention to, whether, the X-Men fans or the Punisher fans or the Avengers fans were going to buy into it. We just thought we'd put something good out there, and hopefully the audience will take to it, and they did.
So for you, June, what were you working on, and what did you do prior to this book, especially drawing kids so well?
I hadn't worked on much of anything. I kind of got thrown into the deep end.
The very deep end.
The very deep end when I got this book. I had never even read a comic book until I was 18. I didn't even know how to read them. My boyfriend had to show me how to read left and right and down. And before Power Pack, I had done some work for a small company out of Florida, Bill Black's Americomics. I had done some work for that, and then DC Comics had a book called the New Talent Book for people who had never been published and were just starting to break in, and I did a story for that. And then I thought, hey, I'm ready to go work for Marvel, and went to Marvel back when you could get in there if you just knew somebody who could get you in the door, which we did, and then you could
wander around.
Then you could wander around. Now it would be like, I think, breaking into Fort Knox.
You'd be escorted under police guard.
Yeah, I don't even think they'd let me in now. But back then, if you could get in the door, you could go from one editor's office to the other. And I got a little job from Larry Hama, a backup story in Savage Sword of Conan, of all things. I don't know what Larry was thinking, but it was a good experience, and Larry was a good teacher. He was known for his brutal critiques that made grown men cry, but I thought they were great, you know.
Who ain't that?
I want to say one of the Filipino guys, but I can't remember, because they were very good at like fixing up newbies like me who didn't know what they were doing.
And they were fast and reliable.
And they were fast, yes. But that same visit when I got the job from Larry, I believe that was when I met Louise, and I was looking for work. She didn't have any work for me at the time, but she mentioned to me this new project she was working on called Power Pack, and could I draw children? And I said, yeah, I can draw children. I had worked, when I was like 16, I got a job at Six Flags over Georgia. We were living in Georgia then, doing portraits in pastel, and it wasn't a caricature. These are supposed to be straight profile, just a profile. That's the easiest view to draw in pastel. And that summer, I did over 600. And I did a lot of children because people wanted their kids drawn. And that was where I started to get my experience of drawing kids. So, yeah, I went back to my friend's place where we were staying and did some sketches. And I think I came in like the next day and showed them to Louise, and she liked them, and we went from there. So I don't think I had ever drawn a 22-page story before Power Pack.
Much less a 48.
Yeah, the first
double,
job was 48 pages, and I had never done anything that large before. So yeah, it was definitely kind of trial by fire.
So the deep end that you got thrown into was a deep end because it was extra pages and
it's a monthly. It was a monthly
yeah.
book. It was a monthly book, which was a real struggle for me.
Now you mentioned that you weren't doing comics before. So how did you kind of get yourself into the mindset of, okay, here's my schedule? Because a lot of friends that I talk to, it's like, what's your schedule when you draw? When I wake up and then I go to bed, and that's all it was. Did you have to work on a schedule or your own schedule, or was it like, okay, I'm going 14 hours and sleep 2 and get back up? And
I don't know. It was just desperation. It was really, really hard. I had no idea what I was doing. I was really intimidated by all the great artists that were working at the time. Karl was a huge help because I didn't really understand the storytelling part of comics, which is the heart of drawing a comic book. And meeting the deadlines was an issue, which is why in the first year or two of Power Pack, there are so many fill-in issues by other artists just to help me maybe get caught up.
I think we figured out that you could produce about 4 issues every 5 months, so we would prearrange to when we needed a fill-in.
Yeah.
And Weezy would plot a story specifically for that, and then usually Brent Anderson would draw those.
Yeah, there were some really good artists. I think Mary Wilshire.
Yeah, she did actually
one.
the first fill-in, yeah. And then I think Val Merrick did one too.
Right, so, I mean, God bless Karl. He should have fired me. He should have fired me, but for some reason he did not. So.
You're talking to one of the world's slowest comic artists, so I had great empathy for that.
And being an artist yourself, I mean, what did you think when you saw the first pages that June was bringing in?
They were beautiful, and we also lucked out that we got veteran inker Bob Wyachek
Yes.
on there, who was excellent, and it's like, June kind of, plays down her capabilities at that point, but to anybody who objectively was looking at the work, it was very sharp, very nice, and it was very rare that I felt that, I needed to point out something that needed altering. It was extremely rare. We had a lot of fun during the design phase, coming up with she came up with the costumes almost immediately, right? That was the first thing.
Yeah.
And they were dead on. I had fun. I got to design Friday, the Smart Ship, it was inspired by a P-38 Lightning plane. But she, besides the fact that, she always was struggling a bit with the speed, the work itself, I'd worked with veteran pros that I didn't think were doing as good as stuff, so.
Thank you.
Looked good to me.
And what an amazing time, because I remember this is when I was still able to buy books at a drugstore and go through the spinner rack, and that was how I would do it. And back then, I don't know if anybody is that old that remembers when you could go in with $3 and walk out with a good stack. And it would always be you'd go through the top and you'd flip down, you'd get all the books that you needed, that you wanted. And then if you were short a little, you'd kind of take on something else. You'd always pick up a number one. And I remember I was in a drugstore in Enfield, Connecticut, got to Power Pack, and saw it, and I'm like, oh, I'll just pick this one up. And I'm like, oh, double issue, it's more money. And I remember put it back, and then went through the whole thing, and then went back. I got my books, went to the grocery store where my parents were, next door, and then we did the whole thing. And as we were leaving, I remember telling my dad, I'm like, can I get, I forget, was it 75 cents for that
I can't
one?
remember what it probably sounds about right.
75 or $1. I don't know what it was.
Since it was double size, it
This-
might have been even like $1.25.
This would have been 84, so
don't
it's
know.
hard for me to.
Yeah. So it might have been 75, but whatever it was, I remember telling my dad, I'm like, can I just get extra comic money this week because I need to go back and get a book? And I went back and got it. And at this time, too, I was reading war comics. That's all I was reading. So to have that book jump out at me like it did, really there must have been something special in there, and there was. It was just such a fun story. It was so light. Like I mentioned, palate cleansing. I would be reading Weird War Tales, Ghost, Sergeant Rock, GI Combat, and then by this time I'm like, I need something to kind of come down a little bit. And it was just such an amazing book. And when you were putting it all together and with Louise, I mean, did you guys, I know it's a little different, but you didn't have back then that instant gratification of people going, oh, I loved it, it was great, or the other side of it, which you don't want to hear, but did you feel right away that you had something, like this was something special?
I didn't know what I had.
Well, there
I
were
really
a lot
didn't.
of peers in the business where immediately Power Pack became a favorite of a lot of the peers in the business, and I don't know how much of it you got, but I know that there were pros that would come in and go, oh yeah, Power Pack is great.
I remember Alan Moore sent Wheezy a fan letter.
Wow.
Yeah, so that was pretty great. That's true. That's
I don't know
true.
if I ever told you. Remind me later. I'll tell you my Alan Moore Power Pack story.
Oh, okay. Okay.
But I don't know. I felt that we had a great comic. It was beautifully crafted, and it was like a breath of fresh air from all the angst and everything else going on in much of the rest of the comics world. That it still managed to connect to it, but it worked well. The one thing I don't know how many people know is that the original title was different. It was Wheezy had this great idea for his very clever title that was so clever that I thought it wouldn't work on the newsstand, and the kids were determined to have themselves be taken seriously, so they wanted a serious name. So it was going to be called The Mean Machine, and I felt that just a new issue on the rack just called The Mean Machine with these kids on it would be such a disconnect that it wouldn't really work. So I'm I can't remember, was the family name Power yet, or did she change the name after the new name?
I think you came up with the title,
Yeah.
and then she decided they would be.
I don't know, I was racking my brain for suggestions, and somehow I came up with Power Pack, which to me is like one of those little transformer things I run my HO trains and,
Yeah.
race cars off of. And it just, she seemed to like it, seemed to fit, and I guess that she changed the name of the family to Power after that. And basically, the parents in there are June modeled them after Walt and Louise Simonson, and that apartment that they're living in was modeled after the Simonsons' apartment at the time. Didn't you go in and make a little map? And
I don't think I did a little. I don't know that I did a little map, but I was very familiar. Walt and Louise were very generous. We were living in New York, and it was, very hand to mouth, and they would take us out to dinner, and we would stay with them in their apartment. We lived outside the city in White Plains, and they lived Upper West Side. So I was very familiar. We based the neighborhood that Power Pack lived in on that Upper West Side neighborhood, and the school, and the
did you
apartment.
Go to the Indian Oven?
Yes. And the apartment that Louise lived in was basically where the Power Pack kids lived.
It was art modeling life.
There you go.
There you go. Before we get going with any more, does anybody have any questions? Because this is for you guys. This is a great opportunity to have those questions answered. I'm somebody that, doing things like this, I now get to answer the questions and thank everybody. So I know how it feels for me to be able to say, thank you so much for making a book that made me ask my parents for more money to go back and get it. I also didn't mention, my parents used to send me, just to show you the time that we lived in, we would go grocery shopping. There was a McDonald's across a pretty busy street. So what would happen is my parents we would go to McDonald's, and because back then you had to wait, I had to eat everything plain with no vegetables, so just plain cheeseburger. So back then you had to wait 3 or 4 minutes, which is hard to believe, or 5 minutes for the burger, because remember they'd fill the chutes
Right.
with the food, so mine was special. So instead of having me complaining, my parents used to give me the money to go across the street, like a busy street, and it would be like, here's your money, get your comics, don't get hit. And I would go across and come back, and I was 10 or 11, 12, 13, and then come back. And if I didn't come back, they would just bring the food and meet me in the grocery store, because they knew that, he's deciding what comics to get. So thank you again so much for that. That was just, it's those times when I listen and go back, and I have a spinner rack in my office, so I get to relive that every time I put books in and take books out. So that was a lot of fun. So you had a question?
Yeah, I have a question for each of them. June, I was wondering, like, the concept of the aliens, the chameleons and snarks, how much did you contribute to it or did you at least have a vision of what they looked like? Like, how was that design process for the aliens?
Well, Karl, we were just talking about this. Karl and I think kind of did the Snarks together.
She did the front half, I did the back half, but literally.
I think you did the really bizarre legs.
Yeah,
on
the
them.
kind of reverse grasshopper.
Yeah. And then the chameleons, I just wanted to do something different. And the head part is actually based on a seahorse. People are always like, oh, it's a horse. But if you look at a seahorse head, the way I designed their skulls and their snouts is more like a seahorse. But I didn't want it to just be a weird head on a typical bipedal human body. So I gave them legs like a horse's hind legs, or like a four-legged mammal has, the way that structure works. So yeah, that's what I was thinking about. Horses and seahorses.
And then the second question is mostly directed at Mr. Potts. I was wondering, like, how long were you editor on the book? Because were you there until the very end, or did it transfer? Because
No, I was there from the beginning, and then sometime in 1989, I got promoted to be executive editor, and so I was no longer line editing books. I was overseeing groups of editors, and I forget who took over the book at that point editorially, but I kind of like stopped reading it then because it was kind of like I didn't want to see what someone did to the babies I was associated with.
Yeah.
Does that mean it kind of got off the rails at the end? I know you had a chance to fix it later on, but I was just curious.
Yeah, I literally stopped reading the book when I got promoted because I didn't want to see anybody else, messing with it. And I never have read those issues, just the stuff that they've done since then, where they've kind of reinvigorated the original vision. But I think that it helps to make sure that the editor involved has a feel for the intellectual property they're overseeing and they're shepherding. And sometimes I think in the hustle and bustle of keeping the editorial assignments in a way that keeps the books going, that probably not the person that is most interested and so on in a particular property. I mean, I was forced sometimes to edit books I wasn't interested in particularly, but I always did my best. But there probably would have been someone who had a better emotional feel for them.
I can't remember who took over. I had moved on by then.
Yeah. It was really hard finding quality artists that could draw kids, and when June decided to move on to other things, I was in my office talking to Wheezy about who the hell we're going to find to draw kids monthly, and there was a knock on the door, and there was an artist that was showing his work around, and he came in and showed me some sword and sorcery stuff, and I thought, this is nice, but not really what I need right now. And as he was closing his portfolio out, slid this paper from the side pocket of a sketch of his neighbor's kids, and that's how John Bogdanov got his start. So I tell my students these days that you always want to be very versatile in all the things you can draw, because you never know if you can draw stuff that other people can't. It might be a good way to make a living.
Right, and he was excellent.
Yeah, I count my lucky stars that I lucked into two people that could draw kids so well, because it really, most of them look goddamn awful.
And I was just going on to look, and it showed John Bogdanov and Hilary Barta.
Yeah.
So they were the ones that came in after.
No, John. Well, after
this is
after
91.
June, after June left, yeah, they took over, I think, as the regular team. Yeah, I can't remember who inked the fill-in issues that came in before June left the series. I don't remember who inked Brent. Did Bob just ink?
It might have been Bob.
Yeah, Bob
Yeah.
Wedge. Okay.
And it was definitely a series that, because of the way it started and the whole concept of it and what it was, you couldn't just bring anybody in. So I understand when you were like saying, I couldn't even read those books afterwards, because it's you've created this entity, and it obviously means something to people and means something to you as creators, and then somebody else takes it over, and there's no way you could have kept that same perfect vision unless it was clones of the people that were of you and Louise. And very interesting. Those are great questions, by the way. Really good. Did you have any more, or anybody else have?
Just one other quick question, June. Why did you eventually leave? Just out of curiosity. Your run was great, but it didn't last relatively long. I was just curious what you ended up doing next, or why you decided to.
I can't remember exactly. For a while, I just did fill-in issues of other books. I usually had a little more leeway as far as time, but I eventually took over the penciling on Alpha Flight, and I did that for a good year. And by then I had kind of learned to I kept up with my deadlines pretty good on that. I got
For
a lot.
a team book with an even larger team.
I know, it was a team book, and I just learned to pick up the pace, and finally got into that deadline rhythm. I did Alpha Flight. I did 2 She-Hulk graphic novels. I worked on Barbie. I did a lot of Barbie covers and Barbie comics. And then I, at some point, went over to DC, did a fill-in on Legion, a fill-in on Teen Titans, did a 4-issue Supergirl series for them. Then I worked for Dark Horse, did a Star Wars series, and then the whole business sort of imploded. And then I did a newspaper comic strip called Brenda Starr Reporter. I did that for 15 years. Worked for a Kuwaiti comic book company called Tishkil for many years. Worked for National Geographic World magazine for a few years. Just, this, that, and the other. And then eventually came back around to Marvel.
When did you get into teaching? You started at the Kubert School.
Oh, I started teaching. I taught at the Joe Kubert School of Cartoon Art for 2 years. And then we moved to Atlanta, where we were from, and I taught at the Savannah College of Art and Design at their Atlanta branch. I taught there for 9 years and got my master's degree in illustration there. But then took a couple of years off from teaching, and then, gosh, I guess 3 years ago started teaching at Kennesaw State University in Georgia, but teaching comics, teaching what I do.
That is awesome. I mean, my both daughters are teachers. My wife's a vice principal of a high school, so
Yeah.
we know the struggles. And I'll tell my daughter, I was talking to somebody that teaches comic books, and she'll be ripped because she would love to do that. Great, again, questions. You had a question?
Yeah, given that you're relatively new to the medium, what comic artists did you look to for inspiration?
Gosh, there were so many. What really gave me the comic book bug was I was majoring in art at the University of Georgia, and I knew I wanted to be a working artist. I wanted to get paid. And my boyfriend at the time was into comics, and he's my husband now, so I guess I really liked comics a lot. And he took me to a comic book convention in Atlanta, and I met all these incredible people there. Jim Steranko was there. Who else was there? Bob McLeod, Pat Broderick. But there was this artist named Gil Kane there. And I watched him drawing, and I didn't know anybody could draw like that. I didn't know you could do the human figure doing anything from any angle without any reference, just from the knowledge you had stored in your head. And I thought that looked like a lot more fun than working in advertising. And, I think I spent the whole day, I asked him if I could just sit there, and I watched him draw, watched his process. And I thought, I'd like to do this. And then there weren't any schools offering degrees in sequential art back then. There was a Kubert school, but I didn't know about that. And like most of the artists actually, even today, most artists I think are self-taught. And I just started studying other comic book artists. I loved Bernie Wrightson's Swamp Thing. I loved that. I loved anything by Gil Kane. I loved Walt Simonson's work, even though I can't draw anything like him. I tried to learn how to think like him in the storytelling. I still can't think like Walt. Nobody can think like Walt. Yeah, every now and then I'll draw a face, and you can kind of see the Bernie Wrightson. I loved Brian Boland's work. His storytelling helped me a lot because it was a little more straightforward than Walt's. So I don't know. There were just a ton of really cool artists working around that time that I loved, still love.
You got to watch Gil Kane draw for hours.
Yes.
I mean, that's a story. That should be a book right there. You got to sit at one of the master's feet and watch it happen. That must have been. I was getting all chills, and I wasn't even there. So that must have been amazing.
Yeah, it was. It was. And I always loved Joe Kubert's work. So when I got to teach at his school, I got to have lunch with Joe when I taught there, and I made his favorite soup I bring in a crock pot of soup because there are all these old bachelor teachers that would bring in like cold pizza and stuff, and I felt sorry for them. So, you know, about every other week, and this was New Jersey in the wintertime, I'd bring in a big crock pot of soup, and I'd always make Joe's favorite. They started calling it cream of Cuberts.
Oh, jeez.
It was corn chowder with bacon in it, so he loved that. But I would get to go, he had a studio at the school, and sometimes after teaching, I'd go and knock on the door and get to go in and see what was on his desk. And then sometimes after class, we'd have an open modeling session for figure drawing and for teachers or whoever. And I would go, and sometimes Joe would come in, and I never wanted to sit beside him because it was too intimidating. But I'd get to watch him draw, you know, from the model, and you know, we became friends. So that was a great experience.
You know what happened to the pages off the pad at the end of those sessions that Joe did?
I don't know, but one of them was me. Not that I was modeling nude or anything like that, but for my birthday, I was kind of sitting across from him drawing, and he did a little drawing of me in his pad.
Did you get it?
Oh yeah, he gave it to me and signed it and everything.
Wow.
So yeah, that was pretty cool.
See, I think that story for me is more like the Gil Kane story is great. The Joe Kubert one is even better because as a kid reading war comics growing up in the 70s and 80s, Joe was my guy. He was it, and I remember not understanding that there was a whole comic industry or a world that happened before I was born. But I remember when Jack Kirby came in and started drawing the losers and writing the losers from our fighting forces. And I remember being like, wow, this Jack Kirby guy, he's really good. I bet he's going to be around for a little while, not even realizing he had a 50-year career before I saw these books. So that's an amazing story. I met him years ago, Joe and Andy and Adam when they were younger. Mm-hmm. And I was so intimidated by this guy that I was much bigger than, and size-wise, not stature-wise. And I remember one of them goes, Pops is fine. Don't even worry about him. We see him walk around the house in his underwear, so don't be intimidated. And I'm like,
funny.
Okay, that's funny, but I'm still terrified. So really good. Any more questions?
Yeah, we saw Power Pack come back earlier this year. Is there any more plans to bring them back again?
Not that I know of. I mean, they still use the characters in different books. Alex is part of, I think, Mr. Fantastic's
The Future
Foundation. Julie is in The Runaways. I mean, they still use the characters with different artists. I think they try to focus more on a younger audience now, which is fine. That's fine. But as far as like a regular series, I don't know.
You keep hoping that there'll be like a really high quality, either TV series or film or something. But we were talking about this before. Like it's probably better if it's animated because the actors will age out too quickly.
Yeah.
But there was a really horrible pilot that was shot in the late 80s, early 90s that was never released, thankfully, because it was just god awful.
It was live action.
Yeah, and it's like let's take this great concept and hire the worst actors and the worst director we can find, and not have any special effects. And
yeah,
I saw it on a VHS tape, and thank God it never got out.
Was it worse than the Fantastic Four? They were
on a par.
Yeah.
Or the Justice League one. That was
No, I've never seen
the
that.
Justice League one is with David Ogden Stiers from MASH, was Martian Manhunter, and it's a trip, man. That's all I can say. It was an interesting watch, and I think everybody needs to watch it at least once in their life to understand what good is and what isn't. Thinking about Power Pack, it's one of those concepts that I think like the Disney Channel has taken taking a family that has kid superheroes and normal parents and just said, okay, we'll make them all witches or something. But to me, it's almost like that is perfect for like a Disney Channel show or something like that, where
One would think.
you would just you've got the built-in angst, you've got superheroes, you've got aliens coming in, you've got the parents that are,
Oblivious.
oblivious to everything, and the kids, because that is a show. It's like every Disney show had the kids running the house, which when my daughters were younger thought that that's the way things were. It's like, no, we're not bumbling Disney parents. We're in charge. You're
Yeah.
not. But it's still kind of just shocking. Like this, it's such a great property that needs to still be going in its truest form.
At one point, when they, on one of the cable channels, they have, these documentaries about how the cinematic universe kind of came together. And at one point, I heard somebody make an interesting comment about, I guess it was somebody that worked on the first Thor film, that originally they'd been considered as a writer for Power Pack. So it seems like at some point they were considering doing a Power Pack film, but for whatever reason it never got off the ground.
Although I think, didn't the guy, I can never remember his name, the Guardians of the Galaxy director
Oh, the guy that's at DC now?
was,
Yeah.
had wanted to do
Oh, yeah?
a Power Pack. I'm kind of glad he didn't, because I think he wanted to make it dark and gritty. It's kinda-
Although Guardians, the first one anyway, had a lot of...
Oh, the first one's
yeah,
great,
yeah.
yeah. Second one, not so much. Anyway, that's just me.
That's the way it is with a lot of films.
Yeah.
Any more questions? We've had some great ones.
One more question.
Yeah.
Why do you guys think that, I've noticed one of the problems with kids and teen superheroes is they always end up getting aged out a lot. It seems to be a common, whether you're in Marvel or DC, they've introduced like new Wonder Girls, or suddenly the New Mutants might be in their early 20s, or stuff like that. Why do you think that it's tough to keep the kids in these superhero universes? You guys have any opinions on that?
I suspect it's like so many things about the bottom line. They feel like the books about older characters, teenagers, fully developed women sell better than books about little kids. That's just my guess.
I think maybe some of it too might be that if the characters have been around a while, a lot of the people that have been working on them are getting older, and it's sort of like, family, everybody's getting older at their own pace a bit too, or at slower pace in comic book time. So that might have something to do with it. Plus, when new creators come in, they want to add their own new spin to it, and the kind of default thing to do with younger characters is let's make them older. And it's comic book time moves inconsistently too. Like I don't know how long it took, Peter Parker to graduate high school, and how long he was in college, but it goes in strange spurts, and then someone comes in and negates half the stuff that went before. So it's whoever's in charge at that moment.
Yeah. Anybody else?
Nobody else. If you want, I can tell my Alan Moore Power Pack.
Yeah,
Sorry.
why not?
I don't know. Does anybody want to hear that?
Nah. I'll put them to sleep.
I think we all want to hear that.
It's sure. My first convention in the UK was in 1985, and by that point, Alan had stopped going to conventions because he had just gotten so big and just tired of dealing with the masses. But he did agree to meet some of us that had come over from the States at the hotel bar in Britain. And he comes in and sits on the bar stool next to me, and it's very kind of an intimidating look. It's like, this big, long, mane of hair and all that. And first thing he says, oh, you're the editor that made Louise Simonson change something in Power Pack. I thought, here we go. And it turns out, he says that he and his wife were members of the Green Party. And Alex at one point got tired of having to be pushed around by his siblings to, to fly because he could negate gravity, but he couldn't propel himself. So he decides he's going to use aerosol cans to propel himself. And I asked Louise to make sure that it was noted that they were non-fluorocarbon cans. And so I'm getting ready to get blasted by Alan Moore for, suggesting that she change something. And he goes, I think that's great. My wife and I are members of the Green Party and all this, that. And then what's strange is that he's like about from here to the mic and he's chain smoking in my face. And I'm having to go like this, and he didn't get the disconnect at all. I wasn't about to bring it to his attention.
Yeah, no.
Wow. So with a couple minutes that we got left, what are you guys working on now, or what are you doing?
Right now, I draw a newspaper comic strip. Remember newspapers and comic strips? It's called Mary Worth. It's another what's called a legacy strip. I believe I'm like the 5th artist to draw this, and I work on it with my husband, Roy Richardson. And we've been doing that for 8 years now.
Wow.
So, if you 8 years on Mary Worth, 15 years on Brenda Starr, times 365, a lot of comic strips. Anybody want a comic strip? We should just get some away. So we're still doing that. I still teach part-time at Kennesaw State. I do some conventions. I may be doing another proposal for a comic book with a writer named Stuart Moore. We worked together on a series for Ahoy Comics called Captain Ginger. It's a really good series. It's basically, I would say, like Battlestar Galactica, but with cats.
Sign me up.
It's a lot of fun. It's really good science fiction. People are like, oh, it's cats. My kids would like it. Not really for little kids. There's not really sex and violence. Well, there's like a little bit, some violence. But I don't think kids would like it. Maybe. Anyway, but I'm working with him maybe on a new book that instead of cats is horses. Yeah, well, I love drawing horses, and I know horses, and I'm not really sure. It's probably like 0.005% of the population that would be interested in that, but we'll see. Anyway, he has a great premise. Right now, that's about it. I've also taken up oil painting, and yeah, that's what I'm up to. I feed cats, ride horses, draw pictures. That's it.
That's a great life.
Yeah.
What's harder to draw, a horse or a bicycle?
Bicycles. I hate drawing bicycles. Bicycles, cars, motorcycles. I've always drawn. That was one of the first things I learned to draw when I was a little kid. I always loved drawing horses.
Nice.
Carl, you want to
Oh, what
talk
I'm up
about?
to?
Yeah.
I teach undergraduate and continuing ed classes at the School of Visual Arts in New York. The continuing ed classes are online. The undergrads are on site. I'm always working on a variety of personal creative projects. I've been struggling for a long time to finally get the Alien Legion made into a film. We made some progress recently, got Tim Miller attached as a director and a new deal at Warner Brothers, but this is the 6th time I've optioned this thing, so hopefully 6 times the charm. Bill Reinhold and I have been working on, since the dawn of time, a long graphic novel that I wrote that's based a lot on my family's experiences in the Philippines during World War II. He's doing beautiful stuff that is ink wash, and then we shoot it and turn it into sepia tones, so it has faded newsreel footage kind of look. But he's been working about the pace of a dead snail, unfortunately. But when he does turn out work, it's gorgeous. So I hope I'm alive when it gets done.
And you guys are here for the rest of the weekend?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah,
we
so
are.
find out where they are. Where are your table numbers so we can send people?
I have no
I have no idea.
Okay. So
We're near the back right corner.
And
if
I'm,
you're going back in the
I'm on
hall.
the other side of the curtain wall from there.
Yeah, so
So
if you find Carl on the other side,
Vice
from him,
versa.
and vice versa.
So just follow the rainbow.
That's it. That's
We'll
it.
go with that. Well, thank you guys so much for joining us. Thank you for all the work that you've done over the years that have obviously had impact on a lot of us. So thank you very much.
Well,
It's our
thanks for
pleasure.
having us.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for coming, guys.
Thank you.
Appreciate you.
Excelsior!